Living in the year 2012, when young people hear the Great Depression, they think of sad times of poverty, but are not fully aware of how many people's lives were greatly impacted during the 1930s.
The Great Depression was from 1929 and lasted until World War II. Canada suffered a decade of poor economy and an all-time low of immigration and birth rates. Between 1929 and 1933, 30% of the labor force was unemployed, and until World War II, the unemployment rate never declined below 12%.
The Prime Minister in the 1920s was Mackenzie King, but was replaced in 1930 by R.B. Bennett, who was a millionaire lawyer from Calgary. Canada voted for Bennett with expectations he would improve the poor economy and raise tariffs. Since this hardly progressed the economy's state, he introduced the new policy in 1935, promising unemployment insurance, a reduced work week, and minimum wage. However, Bennett's new policy failed and did little to help Canada, therefore leading to the re-election of Mackenzie King in 1935.
King dropped the new policy in 1937 and established a new reciprocity treaty with the U.S.
He converted Canadian Radio Broadcast Commission, CRBC, into the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, CBC, and nationalized Bank of Canada. In addition, King supported relief camps with funding.
The main trigger of the Great Depression, not only in Canada but worldwide, was when the stock market crashed on October 29, 1929. This affected Canada because their economy depended on the other nations to buy Canadian goods, especially wheat. 33% of the gross national income was from exports, so when countries stopped buying goods after the stock market crashed, Canada was particularly affected. In the late 1920s, Canada's primary industries reached limits to their development, but kept on producing. There is more pulp, paper, metals, and cars produced than could be sold. Similarly, there were also other things that helped stage the Great Depression. A total of $337 billion was spent on World War I, and money was excessively made and borrowed, creating huge debts and inflation after the war.
People's lives were flipped upside down. As jobs became scarce, people's salaries were drastically reduced. For example, a teacher's salary went from being $1,050 to $400 in a couple years. This resulted in people having to register for relief rates that were provided by the government. In order to be eligible, families had to turn in their liquor permit, license plates, and telephones. The monthly relief rates varied city to city, where a struggling family of 5 received as little as $19 a month. 1 in 5 Canadians relied on government relief in order to survive. As poverty grew throughout the country, people could not help but blame Bennett and even name things after him. For example, calling a rundown car a Bennett buggy. Although there were no official counts of starvation, medical reports of scurvy and other nutrient deficiency diseases were common.
Not only did Canada as a whole hit rock bottom during the Great Depression, but the 4 western provinces were tremendously affected compared to that of the East. The West depended almost entirely on primary product exports and went bankrupt from 1932 onwards. Saskatchewan's total province income dropped from 90% in 2 years, forcing 66% of the rural population to go on relief. While, on the other hand, although Ontario and Quebec also faced extreme unemployment, their diverse industrial economy protected their domestic markets. Likewise, the Maritimes had an economic decline start in the 1920s, therefore they had less of a distance to fall during the Depression. Suicide rates also increased. In 1927 to 1929, it was 300, and then in 1930 alone, the suicide rates were increased to 404 suicide deaths. Canada's population growth in the 1930s reached its lowest point since the 1880s because of a combination of descending immigration and birth rates.
Immigration dropped from 169,000 in 1929 to 12,000 in 1935, and Jews fleeing from Germany were denied a sanctuary in Canada. Many families relied heavily on government relief funds to feed their family. Sadly, when a child turned 16, the relief was cut, resulting in thousands of young men having to leave their homes looking for work. They rode freight trains going west in search of employment, but were unsuccessful. To keep these men from wandering around, the government set up relief camps, also known as slave camps, in interior areas, where the men would work 44 hours, 6.5 days a week, for only 20 cents a day. As time went on, workers became frustrated with the poor conditions they endured and formed a union under the leadership of Arthur Evans. In April 1935, the Workers' Union went on strike, filling the streets of Vancouver. They demanded rights to improve conditions and get benefits of these relief camps.
After 2 months in Vancouver and zero support from the government, strikers decided to bring their movement to Ottawa. June 3, 1935, a group of truckers climbed into boxcarts and headed for Ottawa, stopping numerous times to pick up young men who also wanted a change. After hearing about the On to Ottawa trek, Bennett wanted to put a stop to it. He sent RCMP to Regina to wait for the truckers. When the boxcarts hit Regina, they were attacked by police and turned into what is now known as the Regina Riot. Seeing as all the strikers could not proceed, a small group of 8 men continued their movement to Ottawa. On June 22, 1935, the 8 strikers, including Arthur Evans, met with Bennett and presented their strikers' demands. After a heated argument, Bennett refused to meet their demands and believed that they were a threat and could overthrow the government.
Canada's recovery from the Great Depression took place when World War II started in 1939. The total war mindset gave many job opportunities for both men and women. As you can see, Canada was amongst the most affected during the Great Depression. The Great Depression shows us that as young Canadians, we should appreciate the sacrifices citizens took to make our country and our economy what it is today.